Hello, everyone. We have about a minute or so before the scheduled start. I wanted to save you from the pre-recorded voice that just keeps on nagging at you while you're hanging out in cyberspace out there. Um, but we're just going to let people. I'm noticing that there's folks still signing in, so we're maybe give it a couple of minutes to do that. Um, as far as a format for the show, this is our first lab, so thank you for popping in. We've learned a lot from questions that you all have submitted, and we're gonna like to make this like a regular process that we do, maybe on a month or on a monthly basis at the end of every month to catch back up with everybody, but basically offer an hour snapshot of things that we're seeing, answer the questions that y'all might have because we have a lot of data that might be able to answer some of these things. It spurs us to do new research as well. So this is good feedback from you all about what's going on out there. And as long as we're all locked down, this is a good way to connect. While I'm not on tour, flying around and stuff like that, this is a good way for me to connect with you all and also find out what's happening. So we're going to make this a regular pattern as best we can, even through if and when traveling starts happening again, because this technology is really good to reach people, and it's easier and more efficient. And we're also recording these and try to figure that out as well. So we'll try to find a way to make that available to everybody as well. So from a session standpoint, I'm going to go through the information. We're going to try to have a solid break so that we can get questions. And I'll repeat this again in about a minute or so. But there's a questions bar inside your control panel where you should be able to put in questions. And Kate Ryba, my colleague Kate, will be curating those and going through those and giving me feedback near the end of the presentation. This software has the ability to have up to 250 people. So we're learning with that process of how to engage you all and give you the ability to give us feedback while we're doing the show and doing the work as well. So this has the ability. We're learning that on the fly as well. So we're at about 50 people right now in the webinar, and I'll let it go about another minute, and then we'll go ahead and start the show. But thank you for attending. Okay, let me get the screen shared. Kate, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Can you see my screen?
I can. Looks great.
Okay, great. Ready to go. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming to the first lab. Some of you may have heard the instructions earlier, but I'll just go through them again. The format that we're going to run this, we're going to try to do these once a month. These provide us great feedback from you all, and it gives us the opportunity to share. So while I'm not traveling around, at least until the restrictions are lifted, we're going to do this at the end of every month. The format, the way that we're going to roll with this is I asked you all for questions. So I designed this presentation based around the questions that you all gave us. My colleague Kate Ryba is going to moderate the questions section. So as you all have questions, feel free to put them in the question column. There should be a little box in your off to the screen here in your control panel. And feel free to send us questions after this. What we're going to try to do is use these as a method to get to all of your questions. It helps us design information as well to respond. I might not be able to get to everybody's question through this period because we have a lot of questions. One of the things I've learned is we might want to curate those questions going forward and give you all advance on that. So please give us feedback. We're open to hear that and and talk about that. This presentation is probably going to go 30 to 40 minutes. I'll try to keep that in control, and then we'll break and go into PowerPoint DJ mode, where we'll answer any new questions that this might have spurred for you all. So first, let's get to the main questions from the audience. One of the big questions that a lot of people have talked about, I've heard this from other folks as well, is how do you respond to the public health of density with COVID? And this is one of the things I heard, probably like 3 or 4 weeks ago, maybe a month ago at this point. It's hard to remember. But what is the post-COVID city? Does this mean that the end for Boston and New York and in Europe? And what's been frustrating is there's a paucity of data out there to describe this. New York Times actually did an article back in March that finally got me excited, because like, oh, finally somebody's doing data and information around this, and they did it on a per thousand basis. And if you look at New York at two per thousand, it's less than Milan, but check out Albany, Georgia, coming in very close to New York. So okay, this is per thousand, but it has nothing to do with density. Density is area, people per area. So we went ahead and expanded the table to include the cases per 100,000 per square mile, and is a function of cases per density, basically. And you see that New York is at 0.061, which is coming in at the same as Pittsfield, Massachusetts. So that was interesting, but check out East Stroudsburg is worse. So if you look at the population density of these places, New York is incredibly dense. It's much more dense than all of these other cities that were in their article and in their sample. So that's their density. Here's their cases per 100,000 per square mile, which is basically the cases of density within the density. And you'll notice that, and again, remember, this is the time and place in March and just what happened in the New York Times article. But you see Pittsfield, that's their density compared to New York. It's like 1/40th the density, but they're coming in at that point in time with the same case density in New York. And there was a series of maps, not only in the New York Times. If you look at the cases, you can see that Charlotte looks like the hotspot in North Carolina, but if you look at the cases per thousand, you see that the hotspot is actually up near Norfolk somewhere. And all across the country, Washington Post started doing articles like this, that if you see in Oklahoma, it's not Oklahoma City that has the cases per 100,000, it's actually Greer, North Carolina, or Greer, Oklahoma is the hotspot, or Southeast Indiana, or Southwest Georgia. So just based on that information, density doesn't correlate to the spread of COVID. But I will say one massive caveat to this is we need better data. We need to have a more uniform rate of testing. There's lots of other variables that go into this. But as we see, Wuhan, China has been able to turn itself around, yet we're still having problems in the States. So there's a lot of variables. This one of the great things about COVID is we're actually learning the need for having information and data, which will also help us in the post-recovery. So another question was, what is the most important policies to recover in a post-COVID environment? The primary thing is understanding your resiliency and understanding how you pay for yourself. So obviously we focus on economic information. One of the things that we do with all of our analyses is try to figure out how you operate at a local level. So this is what you can control. So this is just all the different states and how they operate their revenues, their communities with their revenue at the local level. So red is property tax, green is retail sales tax, and the bluish green stuff is other forms that are not consistent across the data set. So in Ohio, they charge a local income tax. That's kind of a rare thing. It's not everywhere that they do that. But basically in property tax, so if you're on the left side of this chart, you have more control over your revenue because you can control it through planning and zoning issues. If you're on the right-hand side, if you're in Louisiana or Arkansas, this is going to hurt these next couple of years. And this is, we saw this in the recession. If you go back in time, 10 years ago, this is what we went through. So this is the income. So people were out of work in the recession. And when you're out of work, you spend less. So this is what happens with sales. So there's a direct correlation between sales tax drops and your income. We're going to go through that again in this next couple of years. This is the effect of the business shutdowns and how we're going to be changing our consumer behavior in the near future. Property tax lags. It drops. I mean, obviously, the last recession was more connected to property valuation and property development than this one is, but we'll still see a precipitous drop because people are going to be out of work and they're going to be out of income. So knowing these streams are these, I call them the sine curves of how stuff operates through our system. There's always ebbs and flows in this, and we have to be patient and understand that. And the more that you diversify your income, the better. This is same is true for any business. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. But there are these ebbs and flows across all systems that average out. But to be stark and honest about it, the folks that are in that triangle, that's going to be really painful for communities. Like this is a city in Oklahoma that 76% of its revenue comes out of sales taxes. That's not good. At a state level, there's some great charts. The Tax Foundation puts out incredible charts on all of this stuff, but this is folks that don't have a rainy day fund. You're seeing this with businesses. It's prudent to have a rainy day fund for exactly these purposes, that you can basically ride through an economic collapse or a pandemic. States, they should have as well. So if you're in Kansas, it's not going to be a good near-term situation that cities and counties can't depend on the state because the state has no reserves. Or also if you're a state that operates off retail tax like Louisiana, you're not going to get the tourists that you've got before, or Nevada. So it's going to be painful at the state level because they've garnered most of their wealth off state sales taxes. So if you're in these states that are circled, at a state level, it's going to be problematic because of the revenue that comes from retail tax, but also a lack of or a low reserve account at a state level. So as any business has to have a reserve account, we need to think of our governments operating the same way, that we need to be able to handle our replacement costs of things, but we also have to have a reserve for situations when we have an economic decline. And also retail is one of the things that we've learned in the past, is that retail is not all consistent across all cities and even within the city. Durango, Colorado, the city of Colorado operates off of property taxes. The counties operate off, the counties operate off property tax. The cities operate off retail tax. This is Durango. Durango is a nice sample because it's isolated. It's in the middle of nowhere out in southwest Colorado, so it doesn't have the influence of suburban areas like outside of Denver or something. But you can see this is downtown's property tax. This down here is the mall, the Home Depot, the Walmart, and all of that's down here, the strip, if you will. This is the property tax model. Here's the retail tax model. And you can see retail is killing it in downtown, even though this is pretty much monolithically retail on the strip. And that's the fact of the information. This is total productivity, jobs. The people in Durango are awesome. There's a couple of businesses that wanted an apples to apples comparison. Peter Schertz, who owns Maria Bookshop on the left, and Tim Wheeler, who has a coffee shop on the right. The two of them opened their books, and we did a comparison with them versus Walmart. So you have two single-story retail businesses on Main Street on the right versus a single-story retail business on the left. This is the taxes paid per acre. So who would have thought that those two businesses were 15 times the property tax of the Walmart? What is that, 5 times the retail tax production of a Walmart, and then all of the jobs. So this is just one level of economics. Those businesses on Main Street are going to be in trouble right now, but they're also incredibly productive when they're working. So this is the stuff that we need to put our shoulder behind to try to figure out how to help out. They don't have the CFO on staff to apply for the PPP grant that, let's say, a larger business might. So these are all things about thinking of these local entrepreneurs, but also thinking about how they return to our community. The second level of economic analysis on this is, let me just ask you a simple question. Who do you think is paying their retail employee more per hour? The people on the right or the people on the left? Probably the people on the right. It might be a nickel or a dime more an hour, but it's going to be more. And then who's hiring the local attorney, the local ad executive, the local website designer? Is it going to be on the right or the left? So if we think economically about our cities and our land uses, we do need to think more broadly about our local entrepreneurs and how they produce. One of the other lessons through the recession, this is called an area chart. So taking, or an area graph. So this is the graph basically done as an area volume for each of these districts. So South Durango, the strip area, is the blue stuff down here. The central business district is the red layer laying on top. Now you can see that the strip didn't take too bad a hit in the recession, but here's the difference of the downtown versus the strip. So downtown was about 86% the production of the strip before the recession. out of the recession, downtown grew in production to catch up to about 91%. So through the recession, the downtown grew in production. So the second question you asked is like maybe they're adding more buildings and stuff like that, doing more infill. And just measuring the square footage, downtown only added 17,000 square feet of retail, while meanwhile, the strip was adding 300,000 square feet of retail over that same period, and yet downtown was catching up. So pound for pound, dollar for dollar, that investment in that downtown yielded more retail tax return to the community. So understand that, understand what's growing, what's got the opportunity to grow, but also what gives you the biggest bang for your buck. And we need to shift our policies and efforts to supporting that growth in the community. And also, as if we're already on track to do infill and supporting infill, this is the validation of why it's important. Impact fees are something that I support theoretically, but we also have to question them. Impact fees, oftentimes, they just hit the person that just walked in the door, and meanwhile, they don't solve any problem of the existing subsidies that are baked in the system. But sometimes impact fees are just ludicrous. This is one of my favorites is in West Palm Beach, Florida. This is the impact fees, transportation impact fees that the county charges. These are the different zones. Downtown West Palm Beach, Florida is in this zone number 2. And if you look at all the impact fees paid, people in zone 3 out here in the acreage area, you can see they're all paying impact fees. That's true. That is indeed true that the suburbs pay impact fees and the urban environment pays impact fees. But when you look at the scale difference of what's being paid in the downtown versus out here, it's night and day difference. So the downtown is producing about 21% of the impact fees of its district. It's only taking up 1% of the land area. When you look at the projects and how they're funded, so we have the revenues in green here. This is the money that district in the downtown produced, about $9 million over 10 years. But meanwhile, they only spent $7 million in the project area. We presented this in the community. It was kind of interesting because out in that acreage area, they were spending $50 million on this one roadway project. So let's recap. Downtown produces $9 million. It only gets back $6 million. Out in the acreage, they only produced 14 million, yet they got 70 million. When we were talking about this with the county's engineer, we said, why are these projects only kissing the edge of the district over here? You can see just at the edge, there's no internal investment into the downtown. He said, well, that's because our ordinance says that we can only do new roadway expansion. We can't do other forms of transportation. It's our ordinance. So they'll go out and use the money out here and widen highways and roadways, even though it's not necessary for the transportation need. When you look at the tax value out there, that area is never going to produce more than 25,000 an acre in value. Your downtown's producing 3 million. So when you're spending 70 million, you'll never be able to repay for that. So once you've bought it, you can't rebuild it because there's not enough money. So you'll have to come back from the downtown to steal it. Now, the interesting thing is, inside all of the districts, here's Boca Raton and what they produce and what they get back. That's District 5. Here's inside Hillsborough area, it's producing 450,000 per square mile. They're getting back a little bit more than they produce. This is the acreage area, Zone 3. They get back 250% more money than they produce. This is Zone 2, which is North Palm Beach, and then West Palm Beach, or sorry, this is West Palm Beach zone, and then this is the North Palm Beach, getting back more than double their money. When I presented this chart, it was kind of interesting because it was pretty obvious that you could see how they're taking money out of some districts and giving it to others. Interestingly, the ordinance also says you're not supposed to be taking money out of one district and giving it to another district. So if you're trying to figure out how your community has wealth or where it's going, you have to dig into this stuff to see how, I mean, frankly, that's an abuse of how the ordinance was crafted or the intention of the ordinance. Secondly, you should be asking, is it really necessary to charge a $100,000 impact fee on a restaurant that's going into an existing building? Is that creating new trips? So there are policies that are out there that are essentially robbing the wealth out of areas, and we need, now is the time. We're in a crisis situation that needs to change. That shouldn't be languishing. And we need to question whether or not that's still a good policy to have. Is it really necessary? So there are subsidies that are baked into all of this. One of the other questions that y'all gave us was what strategies, incentives, and subsidies have worked best to promote infill and maximize existing infrastructure. We don't have a one-size-fits-all answer to that. You know, our attitude is it's the way that you think about the way that cities work. So think about the carrots and sticks that are already there. So what I just showed you was a massive stick. It's a massive disincentive to do infill if you have to, or open a restaurant if you have to write a check for $100,000 for a transportation impact fee. That's outside of your zoning process and all this other stuff that you have to do. Open the doors even. You know, that's kind of unnecessary. Now the intention behind it of paying your way for infrastructure, that's a good intention, just bad policy follow through. Eugene, Oregon is doing some incredible stuff. They asked us to interrogate their data. So I'm gonna walk through this as an example of how do you look for the carrots and sticks. So here's their revenue model. And this is where all the property taxes come from. Oregon doesn't have a retail tax. So this was just basically this is the easiest way to do their revenue, is to show it from a property tax standpoint. They also worked with us to give us all their data on the engineering costs for stormwater, roads, sidewalks, pipes, all of that stuff. So this is a side view of the city of floating in a lake. Here's the money coming out of the ground. Here's the cost into the ground. So if you know your revenues and your costs, you can net your revenues against your cost to see what's net positive and what's net negative. Here's the whole city in 3D, and you can see what's positive floating above the city. So you can see downtown is super well. But over out here at Crescent Village, that's doing all right. And there's some other areas. Again, be agnostic about how this works. The data is the data. When you lift this up and look under it, like you're looking for a salamander under a rock, you can see the subsidies writ large across the model in pretty much a uniform spread. Will Dowdy, who was a planner, urban designer at the city, gave us an incredible idea. We did all of this analysis, and he's like, let's just break it down to typology. So we call this the Brady Bunch slide. You have residential, low density, medium density, high density, mixed use, low, medium, high, commercial, low, medium, high. And basically these are the sticker prices. This is the reality of the data of what's going on in the community. So it's essentially a penalty to do the higher density, more efficient use of your property because you're going to be paying more taxes, but it also produces more wealth for your community. So we need to acknowledge the fact that there's a disincentive at the development section, but there's an incentive in the government section, and also how the market's going to respond. The market's going to say, I want a house, Joe. You can't tell me I'm subsidized. It's like, well, you are, but there's also a reality that people want that. Now that's fine. You know, it's okay to subsidize housing, but just you probably shouldn't do 80% of your land use in that pattern. 80% of your land use in subsidy isn't a good recipe for success. Obviously, there's this diagram that we all know from Dwani Plater-Zyberk and the transect. If you just have one ring of your tree ring at 80%, it's not going to be healthy for the tree. So it needs to be balanced out. So maybe now in the near term, you focus on incentivizing stuff that's going to be net positive. So maybe go out and figure out what you did right with Crescent Village and what worked out there, and prioritize in the near term. It could be through tax increment, tax break, incentive, zoning permit reduction time, or whatever. There's lots of ways you can increase the focus in those areas and just triage that, find some way to do it quickly. We'll find subsidies that are baked into all sorts of different processes. This is one of my favorite charts of their sewer system. So here are all the different sewer basins, here and out here, and each of these basins is its own trunk line. So you'll find that they're all charged the same rate per gallon per flush. Now, if this district up here, they have 8 different lift stations. Lift stations are about $1 million a pop. They cost about $50,000 a year to fix or maintain. That's like $20 million worth of infrastructure up here that this neighborhood has that this neighborhood doesn't. So that's a subsidy. Now again, we might not be paying attention to this stuff, but now is the time to start acting and seeing this stuff and then putting it out there, so at least the consumers are aware of the subsidies that are there, and then we can have a community discussion about whether or not this is the best use of that application, or would it be better to put the subsidy toward businesses on Main Street to keep them open rather than subsidize somebody's sewer system. Like, let's be honest about this and be adult about what the costs are. These are 2 neighborhoods side by side near the downtown, and you can see that the one on the east here on the right is a little bit more dense than the one on the left. But when you look at the infrastructure pipes are only 1 inch wider than over here. Yet you're getting double the amount of households on half the amount of pipe. So that means that these folks here have 4 times the amount of pipe per person. So digging a ditch 4 times longer is more expensive than digging it 1 inch wider. That's a subsidy. Secondly, you get more value out of the neighborhood on the right versus the left. Now the engineer would say, we charge a fee, we don't charge valuation. Fair enough. But the Parks Department, the City Attorney's Office, the Fire Department, the Police Department, that's all run off of property taxes. So you're essentially undermining those other departments by offering essentially a subsidy. So it costs you twice as much to make this pipe system versus this one. That's a subsidy. Finally, one of my favorites is stormwater. When you do the stormwater, it's basically capturing the water that comes off of these surfaces. Water doesn't go through buildings, parking, or roads. It goes into a pipe. So this is the whole city inland area. This is it as a square. These are how the land use, this is what's essentially impervious surface. What's interesting is I don't think I've ever seen a city charge for their roads. So they have 3 square miles of roads that are impervious surface. That's more than parking. Why aren't the roads paying for impervious surface? And then 23 square miles of everything else. These are the valuations. One of the subsidies that's out there that's baked into the system is this. This is the cost of your roads, or their roads are about $600 million in roads per square mile, and parking is only $245. So the cost of parking, the value of parking doesn't keep up with the roads. That's a subsidy. But when we just for fun, the stormwater system is $400 million. We asked the engineer, we said, let's just do a little theoretical example here. What if we had more 2-story buildings than 1-story buildings? So we reduce our building footprint. And if we reduce our building footprint, we can compact our city, which means we need less parking because buildings could be closer together. And then that means we have less roads. So let's cut the footprints in half. If we cut the footprints in half, isn't that going to cut our stormwater system in half? Will it only be $200 million? And the engineer was like, yeah, that's reasonable. Now here's the way to think about this. What if we went to our community and said, what's the best way to spend $200 million? Should we stretch out, or should we invest in after school programs, business startups, artists? I mean, have we had that choice? And I think now during the pandemic is a time to start questioning this stuff. Are we utilizing our revenues to get the things that we need in our community to pay for it? And I just want you to think bigger about how government's set up. That basically, we've allowed our governments to behave like the cash register attendant, and they're just moving the groceries forward. And we've got carrots going by the conveyor belt and potato chips, but inside the system, the carrots are priced at $50 a stalk, and the potato chips are priced at 10 cents a bag. So how is the consumer environment going to behave under that pricing structure? We're going to buy potato chips, right? So this isn't a fault of, suburbia is bad or whatever. I mean, I live in a I guess mildly suburban house. You can look out my window here. But we have to understand the pricing structure that's driving that behavior and what's going to end up happening inside that structure. So until we change the pricing structure, we're going to keep on getting potato chips. This is just the way that it works. So some of the things that we see and people ask us about, because we do data, is about market analysis. And I like this question: how useful is market analysis and policy consideration considering land use planning? My immediate response is it's not. I'm sort of kidding though, but I tend to see market analysis. There are people that do incredible work, but to depend on it in a 20-year plan is kind of crazy. It's like, is anybody psychic? By the way, this is actually a real guy. He's from North Carolina. I love this picture. But anyway, back to a projection. I just went and grabbed Greensboro, North Carolina, and here's their projection from the year 2000. They thought they'd be 278,000 people, and it turned out that they're up to about 294, which is actually good. They've got more people than what they suspected, but that's 32% more than what they expected. That's a considerable difference. So if you put numbers into a document, are you going back and looking at them? Secondly, could you predict what our state legislature did to our state maps? And this is our actual gerrymandered maps. Greensboro's in District 12, which, they basically drew a gerrymandered state representative district right through a black college because of how our politicians were behaving at that point, which is wildly insane. Could you predict that in a comp plan? What does that do to Greensboro? And also is the reason why they were doing it was to change how voting happened. So here in our state, we're pretty much 50-50 blue to red, but this designed our state system to lopsidedly go Republican. That gerrymandering maps matter, and it affects how things happen at a local level. So we need to be literate about this stuff, and also realize that we can't predict everything that's going to happen in the future. I just love this district, though. I mean, it's just one of the most insane districts. Is how do you even legitimately claim that this is reasonable? Incidentally, they also got Asheville with this one. Check out what they did to us. They put us into a district that's tied into Gastonia. And also, could you predict what's happening with the markets? We have ebbs and flows in our market that are going to happen in the future. Good times come with bad times. I love this chart from 1931 from a Literary Digest magazine on investments and finance, and they actually went back in time to 1854 and ran all the ebbs and flows of the economics of the United States. Interestingly, we actually could grab the 1918 Spanish flu, and you could see the resulting 2.5 year depression that came after it. They called it post-war, but it was really due to the flu. But interestingly, here they are in 1931 saying, depressions don't last forever. Things are going to be good soon. They kind of missed it by about 9 years. So how long will the future recession last? I don't know. Depressions don't last forever, but we also can't guess when it's going to happen. So if there's going to be a rule, if we're going to put information out there, make sure that we're going back and double checking that, seeing what we got right and what we got wrong. Just be agnostic about it. And no one's a genius here. We're just going to figure out what's happening and use information and learn and adapt. That's being human. What activities and policies should cities be considering in local economies to survive and rebuild? One of my favorites is an idea that Andreas floated close to 10 years ago now, which is a form of lean urbanism, or creating sort of pink zone districts. So cutting the red tape down to just some moderate level of zoning and just seeing what happens. There's, basically those that adapt quicker and move faster are going to turn things around faster. We'll make some mistakes, but you have to do that. The other thing is thinking about taking streets back. Actually, I'm going to skip over this one because this is going to take a bit and I'm running low on time. So if you'll excuse me, I can add this one back in a future episode. But one of the things I just wanted to give a shout out to Michael Sewell at Asheville on Bikes. This is a local activist here in Asheville. At a state level, these are projections of a local project, I-26, and these are all the state's projections of our future growth. One of the things about this project that's been going on so long, we could actually look at our actual traffic and see how far off they are from their projections versus actual. These are super expensive projects when you do it at a state level, and it's not just the state engineers, at a local engineering level. Why isn't our transportation department thinking more about pedestrians? And Michael's gone around the downtown to show that like 90% of the sidewalks will not meet social distancing, and yet our city still hasn't responded by closing off lanes. So this isn't to say that the government's evil. It's just to realize that our governments are set up like a rotary dial telephone, and we're now operating with cities at a new level, and we need to adapt, and we need to encourage and be forgiving to our government making mistakes along the way, that it's going to take a bit to change government and restructure, but we have to work on doing that. Impact fees. Somebody asked the question about, can road impact fees be used to discourage sprawl? Yes. Some of the best work is done by Rick Rybeck. I love this white paper. I mean, literally, that's the cover shot. That's what a white paper looks like, folks. But Reed did this extensive work on this since the 90s. And you can find this presentation online, this PowerPoint that he created about transportation utility fees. So if we can do a fee for a stormwater pipe, why don't we do it for a road? This has been used in many different states. The non-Dillon rule states, This is easier to do in the home rule states. And basically it's just levying a fee on the road system. Now, what we would argue is that make it geospatial. It shouldn't just be a one size fits all fee like our stormwater fees typically are. But there's precedent. It was interesting to see that it's not just in big cities that they do this, that a large set of his sample were in cities below the size of 10,000 people. Interestingly enough, the Federal Highway Administration has some good documentation that you can go online and get some of their recommendations in their information. They have great research. May not necessarily apply it on the highways that they build, but there's good research there. Lancaster, California, we did a project with them around the same thesis. Lancaster is outside of Los Angeles. It's up and over the mountain from Los Angeles. Great group of people. They operate like commandos inside their government. They are a great model of the iPhone form of government. And they have some critical issues. And so here's their development of their revenue side. One of the things that's pretty scary about Lancaster is they have 953 miles of roads, which is a lot of road. That's enough road to go from Los Angeles to Portland. Josh McCarty, our chief analyst on the project, he broke all the roads down to when they were built. And you can see that their great grandparents went on a little road building spree in the early 1900s, and they went to sleep for a while. And then they built a bunch of roads in 1953. Well, guess what? That comes back to haunt you with the first rebuild in 1983. And what their community did is they annexed more land, they let out more development, they got more roads. So this comes back with a second rebuild and brings along with it this. So we stopped them in time and said, what's your build rebuild cycle? And this is what it looks like over time. So they're not going to be able to build their way out of this hole, or they're going to be trapped in a sort of a Ponzi scheme where they can't keep up. And this is Strong Towns does a great job. Chuck Marone at Strong Towns has written extensively on this, and he's right. This is exactly how it operates. That this first wave was kind of dumb, and we didn't plan it out. No one ran the numbers on it, and we just went ahead and repeated it out of habit. And now it's starting to grow on itself and get bigger and bigger. So that's what a Ponzi scheme looks like. It's a pyramid scheme to keep on growing, but you'll never get to the base of the pyramid. And that's how most of our governments operate. Again, it's not their fault. It's just the way that the systems were set up, and it's time to question those systems. So in the case of Lancaster, they can afford about half their roads. I'm not going to go through the whole formula and the setup of the formula. I'm going to skip ahead on that for sake of time. But basically, we came up with the gap that they have in their funding becomes their fee on top. Now, once they saw that they were over what they owe in their road system, they were able to compact these to something like this. So, in the next coming recession, they're not going to be so bad. Now, in the case of all roads and your property taxes, that's commensurate with density and how you use land and how your values per square foot. And these are their numbers and the parking per square foot. Your road's going to cost you $22 a square foot in front of the building and the parking. So you can see just basically baked inside the tax system, you're paying about 10 times more per square foot in your buildings versus the parking, yet your cost is the same in front of the building and in front of the parking. So that's a subsidy. The other thing is we call them the network danglers, the dead ends and cul-de-sacs. These aren't part of the transportation system. So this is essentially a publicly funded driveway. 10% of their road system are in those dangles. Now, when you run the numbers on that, you're looking at $2.5 million a year is subsidizing a cul-de-sac. So this should be thought through at the community level. Is this the best use of the subsidy? So that should be a charge based into the system that if that's what you want, if you want to be off the transportation system, you should be paying that cost rather than the community because you're taking that transportation ability away. Secondly, the further away you are, the more you should charge because you're consuming more of the system. So impact fees and utility fees should all be geospatially oriented, and the further you are away, the more you should pay. So in their ratio, basically, if you're low density and far away, that's the worst of the situation. If you're high density and far away, that's better, but it's not great. Conversely, if you're low density and close in, that's wasting real estate, and you have a lot of infrastructure investment. And the sweet spot is high density and close in. So these were the monthly charges that we were recommending. And again, this isn't a panacea. This isn't an end all. This is just to give you a thought process of how do you look at this stuff. Another question is, if we reduce property taxes on buildings and increase it on land, would development be more efficient? Whoever asked this question, this is a great question. This gets to Henry George land value taxation. Also, Rick Rybeck does an incredible amount of work on value capture, and Canadians do this as well, and also Australians. Henry George was a tax economist who came up with the concept of eliminating buildings paying taxes, because the opposite is true. If I don't have any building, I pay low taxes. So you can have vacant property in the middle of downtown and pay almost nothing in taxes. Elizabeth Maggie Phillips was a Georgist who believed in George's theory and thought it was fair, but she also realized adults are too set in their ways to understand it. So she invented a board game to teach people land value taxation. And basically, we all know this game. It's called Monopoly. It's interesting to us that other countries operate with this. Auckland, New Zealand has a higher land value tax, and you can see it in their figure ground and the density that they have within their city. And sure enough, and you notice how little surface parking you see in their downtown. So it's reflected in their model. You can see it inside their valuation. They're getting a higher net return, basically more return on less infrastructure. It's a really simple way of thinking about it, and you can see it in their models. Even a suburban place like Quinbeen, New South Wales, which is outside of Canberra, it's a way suburban place in a very rural part of Australia. So there's this little village, and just looking at them, I mean, you could see it in an aerial. You could see how dense their neighborhoods are in a suburban place, but check out their downtown. This is a mall in the middle of the downtown, and notice its surface parking lot. So it's this is it. And so you might wonder, how do you park a mall with just that little bit of surface parking? It's got a Target, it's got a Kohl's. It's because this whole thing has an underground parking deck under it. When you have a high land value, you're going to be more frugal about how you use the land, and you're going to waste less of it. So they basically jammed 100, almost, let's call it a 98, 97% building on top of the land because the land's expensive. We also see that in old places. For some reason, our assessors, this is Charleston, these old buildings have really low per square foot values, yet they're coming up like mountains, and it's all due to the land valuation inside those walkable old neighborhoods, that they pump a lot of value into the dirt. So this is just the dirt model in Charleston, South Carolina. So wow, we're at 40 minutes. Kate, should I keep going or should we go to questions? Are you there?
So far we just have 3 questions. So why don't you go ahead with this one, and then we'll get to the couple of questions that people have asked.
Okay, cool. Sorry, I've been moving really fast here, but this is a lot of information. So one of the things about the 3 economic recovery options for local leaders, 3 things that to do. This is actually a good time to look at things. It's painful, but when the music stops, you can see what's actually happening. You're not distracted by other stuff, and there will be cracks in the pavement. Deal with them. Understand why they're there. Measure your gains and losses. Do what be like Eugene, and also be honest and open with your citizens. There are tax breaks baked into the system. Kansas City, Missouri is a great example of this. They do a lot of tax increment finance, and they talk about TIF, tax increment finance, a lot. What's a good TIF? What's a bad TIF? But we show them their actual tax system and how it operates. So, again, we have to figure this stuff out anyway, but this is their tax system. If you're commercial, you're taxed at 32%. If you're residential, you're taxed at 19% off the same $500,000 of value. So this is set by the state law, but essentially affects how the cash flow operates for the same valuation. So when you run the tax bills, residentials are only paying 60% what commercial's paying. Yet residential is the majority of the land use. So the stuff that's in beige gets a huge tax discount over the blue stuff. Now again, this might be good, this might be bad. We don't care. This isn't our judgment. What we want you to know is that that's a tax break. In South Bend, Indiana, this is the way their economic model works. This is the way the tax flow operates. So when you zoom in, you can see where the value should be at the top of the light blue up here. But you can see what they're actually paying taxes on down here. So that costs the community. You have value, but the state is giving a discount. So essentially with this, when you look at the revenue, they're missing essentially, was that $50 million in foregone taxes. So you have a community that really needs to be operating at about $387 million of revenue, but it only actually has $336 million of revenue to play with. So they've lost $50 million in the state exchange, this gift to the citizens. Now again, this might be something you want, that's great, but does the community understand that that's the cost of that deduction? So I want to eat ice cream every single day. What's the cost of my cholesterol? You know, so eating ice cream is awesome, the cholesterol isn't. So people need to understand that in the system. The three things that professionals can and should give up on altogether, go back to the source. You know, we pulled the John Nolan plan of Asheville from 1925, and I love this. No need for a complicated zoning law. You know, in Asheville, there seems to be very little need for an elaborate zoning, complicated zoning ordinance. At that time, our city was 50,000 people. We're only like 40,000 more than that right now. But why is my sign code right now 72 pages long for my sign code? That's stupid. You know, every city's got this inertia that's built up, and we need to go back in time to realize we can make this simply. I'd recommend a form-based code. Pick on the things that you need. Don't focus on use. But also, this is kind of funny. I like this. In the opinion of most people, the provision of space for parking automobiles appears to be the most pressing problem in cities. There's no question about it being a pressing problem, and yet the importance as compared to other city planning problems in many respects is exaggerated. We way exaggerate parking, and it undermines everything in your community. Oh, by the way, before I get to parking, they also ran the numbers on the city. I don't know many comp plans where we actually pencil out the future infrastructure costs and how we're going to pay for it, but they used to do that in 1925 without Excel spreadsheets. Anyway, parking, Indianapolis in Indiana, we worked on a project there for with Gould Evans on a transit corridor, and I'll just kind of jump ahead to this blue line right here where we're focusing on the project. This is the core area of our study. Inside the county, these are the building footprints. This is parking. So you're looking countywide, 27% of the land use is parking, 40% is buildings. This is the county as a square and its land coverage. So, you know, basically it's a one-to-one relationship, pretty close, of parking to roads. And then here's building and a little bit more land coverage. This is everything else. When you look at the finances, this is how the cash flow operates. So the first question we need to ask ourselves is, why isn't parking valued at the same level as roads? So if the values were commensurate, we know that cars are using the roads and cars are using the parking, so shouldn't they pay for themselves? So we don't see that transference. So what happens, because it's not paying for itself, we dip into that building fund and rob some money out to pay for the roads that don't pay for themselves. That's what's basically happening. But when you look at the numbers of parking, this is the county, and then we went in and grabbed just the TOD, the transit-oriented area, and basically taken a pedestrian shed for the transit system, a 5-minute walk from center to edge, and just did the same measurement. So you're looking at 36% of the land area inside a transit corridor is surface parking. And when you look county-wide, it's 27%. So actually inside the city, inside a transit corridor, there's more surface parking than county-wide. That was insane. So this is a question to ask yourself, is this something you really want? Is this something you really need? And what's the cost of that? So inside the transit corridor, this is Indianapolis after all, here's the Indianapolis 500. You're looking at 3 times the land area of the Indianapolis 500 is in surface parking inside a bus corridor. Financially, this is how it operates. These are their numbers. So the average Marion County resident, there she is, there's Marion from Marion County, has 1,200 square feet of building and 800 square feet of parking and 900 square feet of road dedicated to her. These are the values. So once it gets built, this is what the tax assessor puts on as value. So notice the difference. So if you're paying 2% in taxes on 50 bucks and 2% on 3/4, you're paying 71 times more taxes out of that building, even though your cost is $22 a square foot in front of the building and $22 a square foot in front of the parking. So parking is paying 71 times less in taxes. Now, if you put half the taxes into a savings account and let the other half go to pay for the police department, fire department, planning department, whatever, how long will it take to pay off the road with these 2 land uses? Well, it takes 42 years for the building and 3,000 years for the parking. Now, roads only last 50 years. So parking will never pay for the cost of the road, period. That's a subsidy. Finally, these are the numbers of people with no cars in Indianapolis for the county. The 1 car per household, 2 cars per household, 3 cars per household. So 50% of their population has 1 car or less countywide. Inside the bus corridor, you're looking at 60%. So this is data that's just sitting around. If you have 60% of your population with 1 car or less per household, why do you have 2 car per household parking requirements? So this is the lunacy of what we've created. And we should listen to John Nolan. We don't need to fuss about this stuff, so just get rid of parking requirements. Secondly, we need to realize what we've built from an infrastructure standpoint, that we can't afford it because that subsidy isn't going to cover the cost of the road replacement. And what Indianapolis is looking at right now is enough road to go from Indianapolis to Anchorage. That's a lot of road. So could you imagine building that road right now? And that's basically what they're looking at, is they have to go on a capital campaign to build a road to Anchorage because that payment has come due to replace all of that stuff. And this is why they can't afford it. Finally, don't wait for somebody else to do something. There's power within the hands of government that y'all can put action in play. Salt Lake County Mayor Ben McAdams did this, and let me just kind of jump ahead. He basically said, we own assets. Why don't we put them in play, and what would the value be? So we measured Salt Lake County, their property tax, their retail tax, and just looked for core areas of municipally owned city, county, school, any kind of government property. Inside the transit area, they're looking at 3% of the area is municipally owned within, or sorry, the 3% of the land area within the 5-minute walk of the train stations are pulling 11% of the value. So this is a really good place to start because you're getting good value in those areas. It's like a 4-to-1 ratio of productivity. So pound for pound, this is productive. This is all the municipally owned land inside those transit areas. Now, obviously, we're not going to redevelop the whole university and take it over as a private sector thing, but there are a couple parcels where you could release those for development on the university campus and throughout the whole spine of the transit system. Incidentally, Boston does a good job of doing this at their T, the Transit Authority. But you're looking at the opportunity to house 60,000 people and create new jobs and new dwelling units. So you could actually solve your housing problem with land you own, and you'd get $13 billion of new taxable value. This is an opportunity for their community to harvest taxes. So when you're looking at the real estate development in the private sector side is going to have some issues right now going into this next recession that we're going into. What are things that government can do to stimulate the market on land that it currently has? What kind of permits can it expedite? How do you make the good thing easy to do and make the bad thing hard to do? And we need to get rid of those subsidies that are baked into the system. So with that, Kate, should we go into
Sure.
PowerPoint DJ?
Yeah, so one of the first questions is from Joe Batchelor in downtown Sioux Falls. And his question is it legal to charge impact fees based on proximity to the urban core?
That's a question of your state policy. We haven't done work in your state. Sioux Falls is South Dakota, right?
I believe so.
Yeah.
It might be North Dakota.
We haven't done work in the Dakotas to know if you're a Dillon rule state. If you're a home rule state, you should be able to do that. Now, rather than an impact fee, what I would recommend is your impact fee is only going to get the person that comes in the door that applies for something. It's not going to get the folks who are already subsidized inside the system. So if you're going to do an impact fee and try to exact fees out of somebody that's adding to the system, make sure that you're catching the people that are also speculating on the system and doing nothing. Because if you give me as a developer an impact fee, I'm going to turn around and add that to the cost of the housing unit, the cost of rent for the pizza joint or whatever. So it just, as a developer, you just pass it on. But the thing is, if you're broke and you need more money, it's probably because you're leaking the money all over the place, as I showed with the parking system. Does that make sense?
Sure. The next question from John Maynard is this can this analysis be done in a rural micropolitan area?
Yeah, one of the questions came up about small places. Let's see, I think I have it in here. Short answer is yes. This is a town, Brevard, North Carolina. It's 7,000 people in the middle of the mountains. This place, it's just about 30 or 40 minutes west of here. And it is seriously Mayberry, super cool town. Brevard's awesome. It hasn't changed much since this postcard, but here's their model. Their mayor's name is, everybody calls him Mayor Jimmy. And Mayor Jimmy's on Main Street. He has a hardware store, and he's right next door to City Hall. So he literally just walks across the property line to go to his meetings. But when he saw the model, he's like, well, I can tell where downtown is. So you see that downtown, even though the buildings are only 2 stories, I think the tallest building in downtown is 3 stories. You can see that it's not just heads and shoulders, it's leaps and bounds above everything else. Now they were being hit with stormwater model creation or stormwater pipe system creation because they currently have a combined sewer flow that basically impacts a trout stream. And Mayor Jimmy was like, well, if we can do this for the tax system, can we do it for stormwater? And we're like, sure. So this is the revenue model. So we made it a uniform color, like a monochrome. And then we want to basically make a stormwater system as like a jello mold and drop it on top of this. So here's the stormwater runoff. And you can see there's a lot of runoff in downtown. And we dropped it on the model to see, well, at least with downtown, you're penetrating with taxes. So you're getting money out of it. So not all impervious surface is created equal. A parking lot is impervious surface. But as you saw earlier, it pays 1/70th the taxes of a building. So when you go out to the boxes outside of the city, they're producing all the runoff and giving you no taxes. So they're mountain people. We gave them a mountain profile of their taxes and dropped the stormwater on it. So this is the problem. And yeah, let's be honest about it. In downtown, you have an impact with those surface parking lots that are all around Main Street that are producing a lot of runoff and not giving you taxes. You should handle that with a different system than what you handle the suburban area, because the suburban area is never going to give you the taxes that they're giving you in the impact of that stormwater. So maybe you charge them a higher stormwater fee out there, and for the folks in the downtown area, you give them a use it or lose it clause that, you know, they've got to get a permit in to get some buildings built. Maybe you do a cooperative public-private parking garage or something like that, and deal with the supply issues. You know, we'll treat cars like a public need when they're moving, but when they stop, we treat them like a private problem. Like, what's up with that? If the car is going to be our transportation modality system, we should think about concentrating where they park as well and make that work financially as much as our roads. So it's just, again, it's like we have to get past our biases and how this operates. So maybe in Brevard, you know, 5 years to get a permit in, or else you're going to get hit with like 3 times the stormwater fee for that surface parking lot. So when you look at any city, big or small, this is Cleveland. You know, that surface parking lot across the street from those tall buildings is paying the same impervious surface fee. Why? You're getting so much more taxes out of those big buildings. So just be aware of that. Otherwise, what I can do is I can take the building down, waste all the real estate, and just pay you my stormwater fee, but I'm paying nothing in taxes, and I get all this revenue for charging for parking. So again, this is just giving you an example of how we did this in a small place. We've done small places, big places. It's just a way of visualizing revenue so that people can understand it more than anything else. But it's all of these examples are transferable. It's just small places are just, they eventually grow to be something, but they're the same genetic material as big places.
All right, quickly, one last question from Corey Johnson. How do you assess collector streets versus state streets versus residential, cul-de-sac, and dead ends as a portion of property's value and return?
When we do the models, let's see, let's go back to one of the big models. In Eugene, it's a lot of it's network math. This is getting into the weeds. But you know, obviously, if you're on a cul-de-sac, that fee should be just the people on that cul-de-sac. You know, I've got a street in front of my house that a lot of people drive on. I do too. I should pick up a piece of it. I shouldn't be charged the entire frontage of my road, but my road is part of a network. So the collectors should be spread through more people. Actually, you know what? Let's see if I've got it in here. Sorry, just take me a second. We've talked about this on Strong Towns, and maybe this is worth a post. Here we go.
I just
The
want to
easiest,
pop in since we're right at 1:59 to let everybody know that we'll have a recording of this webinar, hopefully to get to you all early next week via email. And for those of you that have to hop off, feel free.
and so like this little cul-de-sac out here, that should be spread onto the people that use it. But the road that more people circulate on should go to more people in the system, and the really thick roads or roads that receive a lot of trips, that should be spread through a lot of people. Now that person that is adjacent to it should still pay a frontage charge or something. And that's just you don't shoot for perfect. You just want to shoot for getting a logical conversation going in the community. And you know, don't let the good be the, I'm drawing a blank on the cliche. You don't want to like just get into analysis paralysis with this stuff. So shoot with the easiest thing to do is get the trip counts from your MPO or your transportation engineers and start using that as a methodology for road disbursement. But that's where I would start. But definitely cul-de-sacs. You know, if y'all think it's a public good for everybody to have their own cul-de-sacs, great. But at least make that a conscious action, rather than letting them be absorbed inside the system. In a lot of cities, every city that we've looked at so far, you're looking at 10 to 15% of your road system is in cul-de-sacs and dead ends. That's not transportation network at that point. So that's private as far as we're concerned, and that's expensive. But you know, there's a reason why people ask for it. They don't want the traffic. Got it. But why should the public pick up your benefit? And is that worthy? If it's worthy in your community, great. Or is it more worthy to subsidize affordable housing? But at least make that a conscious action rather than letting the system drive the subsidy. So if that makes sense. So I got a couple closing slides here. Let me get to for everybody. And I apologize for the questions I didn't get to. Just the closing comment: put the numbers on a map. Maps are important. Visualize it so that people can see what's going on. Don't make things too nerdy, although this is an incredibly nerdy presentation. And I know I end every presentation with do the math, and I sort of joke about it with the count and all that stuff, but we're serious about math. Don't be intimidated about it. There's a lot of math that's undermining good city planning that we just have to look at and make it real for people so they can understand it. We have a lot of this work covered in books that have covered this work, and also folks that do really good math and explain it. I'd highly recommend their processes. Chuck Marone's book just came out. Charles Montgomery book's Happy City is incredible. A very under reported book. And Jeff Speck's book gives you the lessons on how to do the steps that you can do in your community. And I'd also recommend Steve Mouzon's book, and Steve gets into architecture and everything else. And I'll leave these up for a second if y'all want to take screenshots, but again, we'll have these for you. Come to the next lab. We'll move the questions that we didn't get to forward to that. Send us more questions. If you could make your questions, some of the questions were kind of vague and I didn't quite understand how to answer them because I couldn't understand the perspective you were coming from. So just help me out a little bit with some more detail on your questions. And finally, if you need me for a lecture or a project, Kate and Caitlin are both on this call. Reach out to them if we could be of any help to your community. And thank you for your time. I think we're good to go. Kate, everyone, thank you for your time.
Great.
All right, bye, everybody.
Bye.